So every YouTube channel that deals with both film cameras and digital cameras probably should make a film versus digital quality video at some point. So it might as well be now. Before I start into this video, this whole thing is an exercise in curiosity. I've already laid out my reasons for shooting film in a separate video, and none of them are to do with image quality. Clicky clinky link card thingy, you know how this business works. So if you're going to do any test, you have to set the test parameters to determine what is actually being tested, and if I get this wrong, the whole test becomes invalid. Luckily, because I suffered through 4 years of physics and chemistry in university, that means if I mess this up, I get some extra thick egg on my face. So for this test, we need a decently even set of bodies, film, and lenses. And the reason for this is if you compare something like a GFX 100S with its sharpest lens and a Nikon F with its 1959 lens shooting expired Ektachrome 1600, it isn't going to end up being a great comparison. And neither is comparing CMS22 to the absolute dumpster fire of Kickstarter, that is the Yashica Y35. So for this test, we are going to compare some 35mm film to a full frame sensor so that they are comparing the same imaging size. You know, comparing a basic full frame camera to 4x5 might be a bit much skewed in the side of the film. So as for the film, I picked Kodak Ektar as it is the sharpest color film that most people can reasonably access. I could use something more extreme like CMS22, but it's a black and white film and requires special development and handling, making it not really a reasonable option. Now I could have also used Vision 350D, but it also needs special handling with the remjet layer, so most people won't be able to go that route. So to give the film the best chance it can, within reason, Ektar seemed to be the obvious choice. As for the bodies, I picked the Nikon F6 as it is the most advanced Nikon film camera and will give me the best chance of getting images in focus and exposed perfectly onto that film. So for the digital body, I'm going with the Nikon ZF as it is a 24 megapixel full frame Nikon mirrorless and can share lenses with the F6 using the FTZ adapter, so that eliminates the issue of lenses. But you might ask, why wouldn't I just use the Z8 that I have? Well, because I know film won't match it. You know, even the most optimistic readings of the film datasheets won't get 45 megapixels out of a 35mm frame. If you take something like Velvia 50, at the maximum resolution Fujifilm gives us of 160 lines per millimeter at 1000:1 contrast, in theory, it could get you to 45 megapixels. But that's in lab conditions with test charts, not in the real world of focusing issues and stupid shaky monkey hands and all kinds of other real world problems. But also in that datasheet, they give us a measurement of 80 lines per millimeter at 1.6:1 contrast, which is much more real world. And that gives us about 24 megapixels for a 35mm frame, which is also exactly what my CoolScan 5000 can do at 4000 dpi. So everything kind of lines up nicely. Also, 24 megapixels is sort of the entry-level full-frame cameras that a lot of people will actually buy over the higher megapixel versions. As for what lens to use, luckily I can use the same lens on both cameras to remove that variable, and I even went one step further and got a second copy of the 50mm 1.8G, but I also used the 400 2.8G along with the 200mm macro because I just like shooting on that lens, even though I had to focus manually on the digital camera. And with that, we have our gear set of the ZF versus the Kodak Ektar in the F6. And now that we have everything, it's time to go out testing in the real world. Right now. Let's go testing. Let's get those real world photos, load up, so we can test in the real world. Not in the lab, because it's the real world. Is this joke funny yet? So here I have all the images in Lightroom. You'll notice that all the images come in threes. That is because as part of this, I also use the pixel shift function on the Z8 to do a camera scan at 45 megapixels, and then I downscaled it to 24 megapixels as a test to see if that would squeeze out any extra resolution out of the digital negative. Spoiler alert, it really didn't. It gave me the same results pretty much as the cool scan. Some of these images are more useful than others because of issues when I was taking the pictures, like focusing and stuff like that. So to start off, let's take a look at a scientific image with this USAF 1951 resolution target. And you can see here, this was actually shot on my scanning rig using the cool scan lens. And it does seem to have maxed out the cool scan lens on both of these. So we can look at the target here and you can see how many lines we can resolve. So on this digital image here, which is on the left, by the way, ZF on the left, film on the right. We can see here 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are separate. And here we have 6, 1 is here. So it's like 4, 1, so this is 6, 1. And we can see here we're just able to make it out. If we go to the film image, you can see here, we can see the difference between the lines between 5, 1, 2, 3, 4 is really pushing it, 5 is really pushing it, and then 6 is just absolutely annihilated. So this shows that we're able to get about 2 more steps of resolving power out of the digital image. So this shows that the film was definitely being the limiting factor here, because these were both shot using the same lenses, same setup, and scanned in 2 different ways. So here is the high resolution scan, by the way, and it seems to have squeezed out a hair more. Number 5 is definitely a little clearer, but number 6 is pretty much gone as well. So maybe we got 1 step of resolution extra by scanning at the 45 megapixel with pixel shift, but it really isn't that much. First image here is a nice boring image of a tree. How exciting. So if we zoom into 100%, you can clearly see that the film image is more detailed. I actually think that the F6 might have a focus issue going on, but you can see here, you can clearly see more detail, you know, and it's sharper detail on the ZF. So here we have my obligatory deer images. And one issue is that when you're trying to do a comparison like this with deer walking around, it tends to be very difficult to get a good image on both of them because, you know, deer are animals and they do things like move. They're not like a brick wall, which are static. Doing 100% zoom ins on this really is kind of pointless because these are 2 different points in time, not taken soon enough after each other. Let's take a look at these daffodils. This seems like a great image until you realize that I made a bit of a boo-boo and I focused on 2 different places. So you can see very obviously focused here, very obviously focused back here. So not great. And this continues down along the line for a bunch of different images. This is obviously another deer image, but this deer was lying down and just chilling. So he pretty much just ignored me while I took his picture a few times. So zooming in on both of these, we can see that a lot of the differences between film and digital really are showing through here. So film grain is gone on the digital image, obviously. But something that surprised me on this image is how much detail was being resolved on the film image while it wasn't as sharp. So something that you should probably know is that detail and sharpness are 2 different things. Digital image is definitely more detailed. It is a lot sharper, but it's actually not that much more detailed in a lot of cases. This is something that took me by surprise, considering that this is 35mm film. If you take a look here on the nose, for example, yes, the details here are sharper and much better defined, but you can make out a lot of the same details here. You know, these little dimples on the end of the nose are there. Here, the little fine hairs, the kind of weird eyelashes that the deer have, or eyebrows, they're their eyelashes. You know, you can make out nearly all the same amount of hairs in Ektar. There's a few here that are kind of a black color, but you can just about make them out on the film image. And then there's obviously issues here with some exposure, like this is just completely annihilated the detail up here with exposure. But if you look here in the antler and around the top here, you can make out the same points and the same little, like, I don't know what these are called, like bone lump things, where the antler is kind of connected to the skull. You can see how they're pretty much all there on. And that is what really surprised me here, is that the film image was able to capture this amount of detail. So it wasn't as sharp, but it was definitely able to capture a lot of detail. With this cherry blossom image, if we zoom in on both, you can clearly see how the F6 missed focus, you know, because this here is much more detailed than here. So you can clearly tell I focused kind of back here on the F6, and then on the ZF I clearly focused up here, which is out of focus on the F6. And it turns out that the 20-year more advanced focusing system in the ZF was much better at keeping up with those little movements than the system from 2004 in the F6. Focus technology has definitely improved a lot in 20 years. So here we have an image of some local artwork. If you're from Ireland or Dublin, you might actually know where this is. And if we zoom in here on the or, I believe I focused on this image, it might have been on the Y, but you can clearly see even in the or and the Y that there is more detail in the digital image, as you would expect. So here we have an image of some nesting swans. This was actually shot on the 300mm PF, which is a hilariously sharp lens, but I only have one of those lenses, so I did have to, swap the lenses out on the towpath while people are walking by. A little bit of a hassle. You can really see how well film is actually able to hold up here. So while the digital camera was definitely able to, capture more detail, particularly here, these little like keratin bits is here on the beak. But you can see up here the detail around here in the sort of black area. I was focused on the eye, but I don't know what this part of the bird is called, but the like cheek of it where the beak connects to the head. And up here in the feathers, you can also see the fine detail that the ZF was able to capture. But the film image didn't fall behind as far as I thought it would. You can still see some of the little bits of keratin here. You can make out nearly all the detail in this part here of the face, or the jaw, whatever it's called. And you can also see a fair bit of detail in the feathers here on the head as well. So this one really surprised me. And in particular here, it definitely seems that the grain itself is a limiting factor in these images. You can only go as small as the grain is. So if we zoom in on these images of the flower, it's the same story. You can really see here the kind of grain structure is blocking me from capturing the detail in this little like stalk. While here on the digital image, you can clearly see it's a lot better defined. And this is just sort of all over. You can see the detail on the petals themselves, the kind of texture is just sort of merging with the grain and turning to mush. Here we have another image. This one I just kind of got bored and didn't color correct it. But you can see zooming in on both of these, as you can see the detail on the petals obviously captured on the digital image. I do think this is obviously an exposure issue because this is just completely blown out, because up here and down here in the darker area, you can see how there is a little bit of detail being captured with the, I was going to say veins, but they're not called veins on the plant. The little like passages here in the plant and the ridges. So you can see here, you can make out a good few of them on the film image, but obviously on the digital image, you can make them out a lot more clearly. So, but you can clearly tell that once again, the 24 megapixel full frame digital image is resolving a good bit more detail than the 35mm film image. So those test results seem to be pretty damn conclusive. It was very clear when we zoomed in Lightroom that the 24 megapixel full frame camera was able to beat in both detail and in sharpness the 35mm film camera from 20 years ago. With film technology that's honestly older than that, it's probably closer to 30 years old, although Ektar is a newer emulsion. But the results were also kind of surprising because the film image actually held up a lot better than I thought it was. I honestly was expecting it to be kind of a blowout, which it was a little bit, but the film image was able to capture a very respectable high quality image in the emulsion, and with a good scanner like the Coolscan, you can definitely pull a lot of that detail out and get a really nice scan. But the real question we have to ask ourselves is that, does this matter? And to illustrate whether it matters or not, I've got two very nice prints here. So the first print is of some green leaves, and the second print is of a red maple leaf. Now, which of these images was shot film and which of them was shot digital? And the red one is the digital image. And what's very interesting about this comparison is that this was not shot on a 24 megapixel camera, this was shot on the Z8 on a 45 megapixel camera. However, when you print these out like this, you get basically the same amount of detail translated onto an actual print. And it really goes to show that even though your output format might be something a little bit challenging, this is definitely a little bit of a challenge for a 35mm negative, it's a 12x blow up after all. But even that is able to handle a reasonably large print like this very easily, and so is the digital camera able to handle it as well. Really, when it comes down to it, depending on your final delivery format, having a super high-end digital camera or a film camera from 20 years ago, it are honestly probably both going to be able to handle the image just as good as each other. And that, I think, is the real conclusion, that it really doesn't matter what you're shooting on, as long as you're having fun and you're making the images you want to make. And that's it. I'll see you next time.